Hello, dear YouTube viewers, I hope you're doing well. Okay, so let's start our video. Daniel had always been the kind of man who believed that hard work, persistence, and honesty could carry him further than shortcuts ever would. He wasn't the loudest or the flashiest employee in the company, but he was reliable and everyone knew it. Over the years, he had built his career brick by brick, staying late when others left, double-checking his work, and earning the quiet respect of those who valued diligence over charm. His greatest dream was simple but deeply personal. One day, he wanted to earn a well-deserved promotion, something that would show his years of sacrifice and long hours hadn't gone unnoticed. He carried that ambition like a fire in his chest, pushing himself to do more every day. The workplace around him was polished and fast-paced. From the glossy hallways to the constant chatter of ambitious employees, the environment was professional but edged with tension. Everyone wanted to climb higher. Everyone wanted recognition, and Daniel often felt like he was running in a race where charm sometimes outweighed skill. That truth became most visible when it came to his boss, Mr. Harrison. At first glance, Harrison seemed like the perfect leader, tall, well-dressed, with the kind of confident smile that could win over a boardroom in seconds. He carried himself with authority, often sprinkling his conversations with references to his Ivy League MBA, dropping Harvard's name like a badge of honor. To most of the staff, he was untouchable, a man destined for bigger things. But Daniel noticed the cracks. Whenever technical questions came up in meetings, Harrison would skirt around them, either changing the subject or pushing them onto subordinates. His answers were vague, surface level at best, and Daniel couldn't help but feel something wasn't adding up. He brushed it off at first. Maybe Harrison was just delegating, maybe he didn't like getting into details. Yet every time Harrison boasted about his academic background or past achievements, there was a faint insincerity in his tone. Daniel couldn't prove anything, but his instincts whispered that there was more beneath the surface. He tried to ignore it, reminding himself that suspicion without evidence could be dangerous. Still, the thought lingered, like a shadow at the edge of his mind. Not long after, Daniel was handed one of the biggest responsibilities of his career, a major project that could impact the company's reputation. Harrison personally placed him in charge of the groundwork, making it clear that success or failure rested on his shoulders. At first, Daniel felt honored. This was the kind of opportunity that could finally earn him the recognition he'd been waiting for. He threw himself into the assignment, combing through files, reports, and old project data. It was during this process that the first concrete clue revealed itself. While going through internal documentation, he stumbled across Harrison's submitted resume and scanned copies of his supposed degree. The diploma caught Daniel's eye immediately. It was meant to be from Harvard Business School, yet the paper looked strangely generic. More than that, there were small spelling inconsistencies in the Latin phrasing at the bottom, errors no prestigious university would ever allow. His pulse quickened as he read it over again and again, each time more certain something was wrong. Curiosity led him further. He checked LinkedIn, digging through Harrison's listed education and work history. There were gaps and vague timelines that didn't match up with the company's internal records. Some jobs were listed with no clear description, only flashy titles, as though Harrison had dressed up his past without substance. Daniel's suspicions, once just quiet doubts, now had fuel. He wasn't the only one who had noticed either. He overheard colleagues whispering in hushed tones, joking about how Harrison never seemed to know as much as he claimed. Yet whenever the topic came close to seriousness, the conversations would stop abruptly. Nobody dared to question him directly. That silence was telling. People were afraid. Harrison had power, and challenging him could mean losing a career overnight. Daniel felt the weight of that fear pressing down on him too. He found himself torn between two instincts. On one hand, he had always believed in integrity, in standing up for what was right no matter the risk. On the other, he had worked too hard to build this career, and one wrong move could destroy it all. Exposing the truth might end Harrison's reign, but it could also end Daniel's livelihood. That internal conflict gnawed at him day and night. He would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, asking himself the same question over and over. Was it worth it? Should he protect himself and stay silent, or should he risk everything to bring the truth to light? The answer wasn't clear yet, but the stakes had never felt higher. Daniel could sense that whatever choice he made would alter the course of his life. The shadow of Harrison's secret hung heavier than ever, and for the first time, Daniel realized he was standing at the edge of something much bigger than a simple office project. Daniel couldn't shake the image of that strange diploma. It wasn't just the odd font or the clumsy Latin mistakes. It was the way it seemed hollow, like a counterfeit coin trying to pass as gold. He told himself to let it go, that obsessing would do more harm than good. But every time Harrison walked into the office, grinning like a man with nothing to hide, Daniel felt his chest tighten with frustration. He had worked his whole life for honest achievements, and here was a man possibly standing on lies, holding power he didn't deserve. After days of restlessness, Daniel finally gave in to his curiosity. One afternoon, sitting at his desk with the blinds half drawn, he picked up the phone and dialed the registrar's office of Harvard Business School. His hands trembled slightly as he typed in the number he had found after a long night of online searching. A polite voice answered, and Daniel explained he was trying to verify an alumnus, Mr. Richard Harrison, class of a certain year. There was a pause on the line, the kind that seemed to stretch forever. Then the registrar responded firmly, "I'm sorry, but we have no record of anyone by that name graduating from our institution." The words hit Daniel like a blow to the chest. He asked again, spelling out the name, giving the year, double-checking every detail. Still, the answer was the same. No record. No degree. Nothing. It was as though Harrison's so-called Ivy League achievement had never existed at all. When he hung up the phone, Daniel sat frozen in his chair. His heart pounded so loudly, he could hear it echoing in his ears. This wasn't just suspicion anymore. It was confirmation. The degree was fake. The entire foundation of Harrison's authority was built on a lie. A wave of emotions crashed over him at once. Shock that his instincts had been right, betrayal that a man leading so many had conned his way into power, and fear of what this meant for himself. He was now carrying knowledge that could ruin a man's career, maybe even destroy the company's credibility if it ever came out publicly. That knowledge weighed heavy. Daniel paced his apartment that night, unable to rest. He thought about the long hours he'd sacrificed, the faith he'd placed in leadership, and how hollow it all seemed now. But there was another, more terrifying thought. If Harrison had gone to such lengths to fake his credentials, what would he do to protect the lie? Confronting a man like that wouldn't just be risky, it could be dangerous. The next morning at work, Daniel tried to keep his composure, but his eyes betrayed him. Every time he looked at Harrison across the table, the disgust simmered beneath his calm expression. He couldn't hear the man brag about his Harvard days without wanting to shout the truth. During a meeting, Harrison boasted once again about his class project at HBS and how it taught him leadership. Daniel, unable to restrain himself, raised a simple, seemingly harmless question. "Which professors did you study under?" "I think I've read some of their work." The room fell quiet. Harrison blinked, his confident mask slipping for the briefest second before he chuckled awkwardly and brushed the question aside with a vague answer. But in that brief moment, Daniel saw it. The flicker of panic, the calculation in his boss's eyes. Harrison knew. He knew Daniel was digging, and he knew the danger of that curiosity. That night, Daniel's stomach twisted with unease. He had hinted too strongly. He could feel the weight of his boss's gaze during that meeting. The way Harrison's smile didn't quite reach his eyes. The thought gnawed at him. Had he just put a target on his own back? The answer came the very next day. Daniel was summoned unexpectedly to HR. At first, he thought it was routine paperwork. But when he entered the small conference room, he found not just the HR representative, but also Harrison himself sitting across the table. The mood was cold, clinical. The HR officer cleared her throat and said the company had reviewed his performance and decided to terminate his employment due to underperformance. The words rang false immediately. Daniel had never once received a negative review. His projects were always thorough, often praised for their detail. He tried to argue, presenting his record, but Harrison leaned forward, his tone icy yet smooth. Sometimes, Daniel, it's not about the numbers. It's about how well you fit into the culture of the team. Daniel felt the blood drain from his face. This wasn't about performance. This was about silencing him. Harrison was using his power to cut him out before he could speak. The betrayal burned deep. Years of loyalty and late nights, thrown aside like garbage to protect a fraud. As he walked out of the building carrying the cardboard box filled with the remains of his career, photographs, files, coffee mugs, he felt a crushing weight settle on him. He had lost not just a job, but his reputation. To future employers, a termination would raise questions. To his colleagues, his absence would be just another quiet story no one dared ask about. Outside, the city buzzed as though nothing had changed, but inside, Daniel was unraveling. He had done nothing wrong, yet he was the one cast out, while Harrison still sat in the office chair built on lies. Helplessness clawed at him, anger simmered like fire in his chest, and for the first time, he wondered if standing up for the truth was worth the destruction it brought. But beneath the despair, something else began to stir, a sharper, harder resolve. Harrison might have stolen his job, but he hadn't stolen his voice. Daniel wasn't finished yet. Daniel sat in his apartment surrounded by silence, his thoughts spiraling like a storm he couldn't escape. He had lost his job, his sense of stability, and the future he had worked so hard to build. Every instinct in him told him to let it go, to walk away quietly and start over somewhere else. Maybe he could rebuild his career, find another company, another boss, and bury the memory of Harrison's betrayal under new routines. It would be the safe choice, the rational one. But safety didn't feel like enough. As the days passed, the anger inside him grew heavier than his fear. He thought about the years he had given to that company, the late nights, the endless projects, the sacrifices no one had seen but him. All of it had been tossed aside with a single word: terminated. Not because he failed, but because he had dared to see the truth. It wasn't just about him anymore. The more he thought about it, the more he realized how many others were suffering under the same corruption. How many employees had been passed over, belittled, or quietly fired just to keep Harrison's illusion intact. How many had felt powerless, afraid to challenge a man whose entire authority was built on lies. Daniel's anger turned into a conviction that wouldn't let him sleep at night. If he walked away now, Harrison would keep thriving, keep deceiving, and others would continue to pay the price. No. He couldn't stay silent. He wouldn't. The decision settled inside him, like a stone dropping into place. He knew the risks. Confronting a man as cunning as Harrison could ruin what little he had left. But for Daniel, the alternative was worse, the thought of living with the knowledge and doing nothing. He began preparing. He compiled everything he had found: the forged diploma, the inconsistencies in the resume, the email from Harvard's registrar confirming Harrison was not in their records. He printed everything out, organized it into a folder, and backed it up digitally. This wasn't going to be a whisper in the hallway. This was going to be undeniable proof. Still, he hesitated. He wasn't sure whether to leak it to the board, the press, or confront Harrison directly. But something inside him pushed toward the latter. For all the lies, all the arrogance, Harrison had never faced someone willing to look him in the eye and expose the truth. Daniel wanted to be that person. He wanted to see Harrison crumble under the weight of his own deceit. So he waited. He learned Harrison's schedule, noted when the office emptied, and chose his moment. It was a Thursday evening when Daniel walked back into the building, his access badge still functional, not yet deactivated. The office floors were quiet, the usual chatter of keyboards and phones replaced with the hum of air vents and the faint glow of desk lamps left on by mistake. Harrison's office door was closed, but light leaked out from under it. He was still there. Daniel tightened his grip on the folder and knocked once before pushing the door open. Harrison looked up from behind his desk, surprised but not alarmed. "Daniel," he said smoothly, as though they had parted on friendly terms. "What are you doing here? You don't work here anymore, remember?" Daniel stepped inside and closed the door behind him. His heart was hammering, but his voice was steady. "I'm here because of that." He set the folder down on the desk with a deliberate thud. Because of the lies you've been feeding everyone. Harrison's smile faltered, but only for a moment. He leaned back in his chair, folding his hands like a man amused by a child's tantrum. Lies? You've been under a lot of stress. Maybe you should focus on moving on. Daniel ignored the condescension and opened the folder. Page by page, he laid the evidence out on the desk. First, the forged diploma, its misspelled Latin glaring in the lamplight. Then the printout of the email from Harvard's registrar confirming no record of Richard Harrison. Then the resume inconsistencies highlighted in red. Each piece landed like a strike against Harrison's composure. At first, the man tried to maintain his calm facade, but as the evidence piled up, the cracks appeared. His eyes darted to the diploma, then to the email, and his hand twitched against the desk. He opened his mouth, closed it, then opened it again without sound. For the first time since Daniel had known him, Harrison looked stripped of his arrogance. His skin paled, and he leaned forward, staring at the documents as though sheer willpower could make them vanish. His hands trembled slightly, betraying the fear he was trying to conceal. You don't understand, he finally muttered, his voice lower, weaker than Daniel had ever heard it. It's not what it looks like. Oh, it's exactly what it looks like, Daniel shot back. You lied your way into this position. You built your entire career on a forged degree. And when I got too close to the truth, you destroyed mine to protect your secret. Harrison's jaw clenched. His eyes flicked up, sharp and calculating, as though weighing whether to threaten or to beg. For a moment, Daniel saw the mask almost return, the predator behind the panic. But then it slipped again. The weight of the evidence was too much. The silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating. Harrison's chest rose and fell rapidly, his lips trembling with words he couldn't form. The man who once commanded entire conference rooms with ease now sat frozen, unable to summon even a shred of authority. Daniel leaned closer, his voice calm but firm. I don't want excuses. I don't want bribes. I just want you to know that your time is over. The truth doesn't stay buried forever. Harrison swallowed hard, his atoms apple-bobbing. He looked like a man cornered, a man who had lived his whole life bluffing and had finally run out of cards. For once, he had no witty retort, no arrogant dismissal. Only silence and fear. Daniel gathered the folder and turned toward the door. You wanted me gone because you thought it would keep me quiet. But you've underestimated me. This isn't the end. It's the beginning. When he left the office, Harrison was still sitting there, pale and trembling, staring at the damning evidence spread across his desk. A man frozen in place, his empire of lies crumbling around him. For the first time in weeks, Daniel felt a surge of power, not the kind that came from titles or false prestige, but from courage. He had faced the monster in the dark, and the monster had no teeth. Harrison didn't stay frozen for long. When Daniel's words hung in the air, the boss jolted back to life, clutching at whatever shreds of power he thought he had left. His voice cracked at first, then steadied as he tried to summon the same authority that had once made entire departments tremble. You don't understand, Daniel, he said, his tone almost pleading. It's complicated. You think a piece of paper defines me? You think that's all that matters? I've built this company's success with my own hands. Everyone here owes me, my leadership, my strategy, my vision. The degree was just a formality. Daniel didn't flinch. He let the words wash over him, hearing the desperation beneath them. Harrison wasn't defending himself anymore. He was trying to rewrite the narrative, to make his lies seem irrelevant in the face of his so-called achievements. But Daniel had spent too many sleepless nights wrestling with this truth to fall for it now. You forged a diploma, Daniel replied, his voice sharp. You lied to every single person in this building. You stole opportunities from people who earned their place honestly. That's not leadership. That's fraud. Harrison's composure cracked again. He leaned forward, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. Look, we don't have to make this ugly. I can make this worth your while. A severance package. A consulting contract off the books. You walk away and you'll never have to worry about money again. The offer hung in the air like poison. Daniel stared at him, the arrogance in those words making his stomach turn. This was the man who had destroyed his career, who had thrown him aside without hesitation, and now he was trying to buy his silence, as though Daniel's integrity had a price tag. "I don't want your money," Daniel said coldly. "This isn't about me anymore. The whole company deserves to know." The color drained from Harrison's face. He sat back in his chair, as if the weight of those words had knocked the breath out of him. His hands, once so steady during presentations, now trembled against the desk. He opened his mouth to respond, but no words came. The silence in the office stretched long and heavy, broken only by the hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. For the first time, Harrison wasn't a leader, or a boss, or a man in control. He was just another fraud exposed to the light, his empire collapsing before his eyes. Underscore 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 underscore. Daniel didn't waste time after that confrontation. He knew words alone wouldn't be enough. The evidence had to speak louder than anything Harrison could deny. He spent the weekend compiling everything into a clear, undeniable package: digital files, printed copies, and summaries that left no room for ambiguity. On Monday morning, he sent it all. The folder went to the HR board, to company stakeholders, and to a trusted journalist at a major financial paper. Each email was crisp and professional, the tone not of vengeance, but of duty. By the time he hit send, there was no turning back. The storm broke almost instantly. By noon, whispers swept through the company halls faster than wildfire. Executives huddled in glass offices, their faces pale and anxious as they scrolled through the documents. Employees exchanged stunned looks as the truth trickled down in fragments. Harrison's degree was forged, his resume falsified, his entire reputation built on smoke. By evening, the company released a statement. Mr. Richard Harrison had been suspended pending a full investigation. The words were careful, measured, but everyone understood what they meant. The man who had strutted through the halls like a king was now banished from his throne. The media devoured the story. Headlines splashed across financial news sites. CEO caught with fake Ivy League credentials. Corporate giant faces scandal after executive fraud exposed. Comment sections filled with outrage, disbelief, and bitter humor. Former employees came forward, sharing their own stories of Harrison's bullying and arrogance. The narrative shifted quickly. What had once been his empire of control became his stage of downfall. The company, desperate to salvage its reputation, launched a sweeping investigation into Harrison's past projects. Auditors combed through contracts, financial records, and deals that now looked suspicious under the light of his fraud. Every success he had claimed was scrutinized. Every decision was questioned. The damage to the company's image was already immense, but the greater damage was internal. Trust had been shattered. Daniel watched from a distance, no longer an employee, but still deeply connected to the storm he had unleashed. He felt a strange mixture of emotions: relief, vindication, and an ache of exhaustion. He had wanted justice, and justice had come, but at a cost. His own career was still in limbo, his name attached to the scandal even as the whistleblower who had spoken the truth. Yet when he saw the headline announcing Harrison's resignation, he felt a quiet sense of peace. The lie had finally fallen apart. The man who once believed himself untouchable was gone. And though Daniel's path forward was uncertain, he knew one thing for sure: silence had not won. Daniel hadn't expected to be seen as anything but expendable. After all, he had been fired, humiliated, and left carrying a cardboard box of his belongings while Harrison still sat in the corner office. But the days following the scandal brought an unexpected turn. At first, the messages trickled in quietly. A former coworker texted him late one night. "I heard what you did. Thank you." Most of us knew something was wrong, but none of us had the courage to speak up. Another colleague, someone who had barely spoken to him in the office, reached out on LinkedIn, offering words of admiration. What you exposed saved us all. You're braver than I could ever be." Soon, the trickle became a stream. People from different departments, people who had whispered their suspicions for years, now came forward to acknowledge him. Some apologized for staying silent. Others simply thanked him for showing them that power didn't always have to go unchallenged. For the first time, Daniel realized he hadn't just fought for himself. He had fought for everyone who had been forced to endure Harrison's lies. The professional world noticed too. News outlets didn't just cover Harrison's fall, they covered Daniel's role in exposing the truth. Journalists called him a whistleblower, some even a hero, though he never used those words himself. Recruiters began reaching out, offering interviews at firms that admired not just his skills, but his integrity. One company executive said bluntly during a call, "A man willing to risk everything for honesty is exactly the kind of leader we need." It was a strange, almost surreal turn of events. He had been stripped of his job, yet the very act meant to destroy him had opened new doors. Rival companies saw his courage as a strength, not a liability. Opportunities he had once dreamed about suddenly appeared within reach. For Daniel, the greatest relief wasn't the job offers, or the recognition, or even the prospect of rebuilding his career. It was the weight that lifted from his chest, the knowledge that justice had been served. Harrison's empire of lies had collapsed, and the truth had prevailed. The sleepless nights, the gnawing doubts, the fear of being silenced forever, those burdens finally eased. One afternoon, as he walked through the city streets, Daniel found himself smiling for the first time in weeks. The buildings around him gleamed in the autumn sunlight, and the noise of traffic felt like the steady heartbeat of life moving forward. He realized he had faced the worst and come out stronger. His job was gone, but his self-respect remained intact. And in that moment, it felt like the greatest victory of all. Underscore 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 underscore. Time softened the sharp edges of Daniel's anger. In the weeks that followed, he often sat with a cup of coffee at his kitchen table, reflecting on everything that had happened. Losing his job had been painful, humiliating even. There had been days he questioned whether he had done the right thing, whether the price had been too high. But every time he replayed the events, he came to the same conclusion. Silence would have been worse. He thought about how corruption thrived not because of the few who committed it, but because of the many who turned their heads, afraid to speak. He had almost been one of them. If he had walked away, Harrison would still be sitting in that office, boasting about fake credentials while honest employees continued to suffer under his reign. The thought made Daniel's chest tighten with both relief and determination. He realized now that integrity wasn't just about personal morality, it was about responsibility. The choice to speak up wasn't only for himself, but for every person who couldn't. Integrity came with costs, yes, but also with rewards that went far deeper than money or titles. Daniel also understood something else. Careers could be rebuilt, reputations could be restored, but self-respect once lost was harder to recover. He had risked everything, and in the process, discovered that dignity was worth far more than a paycheck. The day Harrison fired him had felt like an ending, but in truth, it was the beginning of something greater. There would always be people like Harrison in the world, those who cut corners, lied their way into power, and trampled others to keep their illusions intact. But Daniel knew now that such power was fragile. Lies could only hold as long as silence allowed them to. All it took was one voice, one person willing to face the consequences, to bring the truth into the light. He felt a deep sense of peace in that realization. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he had proven something to himself, that his values weren't for sale, that his courage could withstand fear. He wasn't just a man who lost a job, he was a man who had stood for something greater. Looking back, he thought about the irony. The day Harrison had called him into HR, accusing him of underperformance, Daniel had walked out feeling small, powerless, crushed under the weight of injustice. Yet that very moment had set him on the path to freedom. Being fired hadn't been the end of his story. It had been the start of a new chapter. On a quiet evening, as he sat by his window watching the city lights flicker against the night sky, Daniel whispered the truth he had come to believe with all his heart. The day I was fired wasn't the end of my career. It was the beginning of my freedom. Thanks for watching. For more videos, please subscribe our channel. Awesome visual story.